Hi everybody, and welcome to GTEC and our today's open lecture. My name is Maria, I'm the Managing Director of the German Tech Entrepreneurship Center. And I always start this lecture with the question of who of you has already been to one of our events? Yeah, okay, some people. So it means that most of you don't know what we are doing, so I'll give you a very, very short overview. The German Tech Entrepreneurship Center was founded to foster entrepreneurship and technology. We do that through working with 3 different pillars. We work with startups. We have a lab here upstairs, the No Bullshit Lab, where we support startups. We work with corporates through executive education and programs where we teach them to think and act like startups when it comes to digitalization, new work, and everything around that. And we work with academia, so we do lectures on entrepreneurship and try to teach people that they can be entrepreneurs, and after university they don't have to end up working for McKinsey or something like that. That's in a nutshell what we're doing. We're also doing a lot of community events just to bring together people, showcasing how great entrepreneurship is, and I'm very happy that...
I didn't know that if I press here something happens.
That we have a tech expert here. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm very happy that Julian Finn is with us tonight for this open lecture. And normally when I introduce people in the open lectures, I tell them, yeah, and I met the people at some conferences and we work together on projects. But with Julian it's a little bit different because we met totally digital on Tinder. And yeah, when you think about doing everything wrong, yes, the date wasn't that well, when I remember right.
Well, we became friends.
That's what I want to say. So we did everything wrong, but the success that came out of it, because this was like 4 or 5 years ago, we are very good friends now. Hi, we are very good friends now, and we work together and we discuss a lot together. He's a great sparring partner for me when it comes to tech topics. He always supports me when I don't understand things on my MacBook. I can always call him and he supports. And he's also co-founder of a great startup, and he will tell us more about that. Give a warm welcome to Julian Finn.
Hello. Well, I need a second to arrange myself because this is a big audience. Also, I've got like several devices I need to sort of simultaneously control. Hi, I'm Julian. Julian Finn in total. My Twitter handle is HTSJulian. You can tweet things about me if you want. I'm probably something like CTO or COO or something of Mautinoa Technologies. We don't really have job titles and we don't care about them, so there's nothing really official. And I used to come from, after working in startups and big industry, I used to do consulting for a few years before I co-founded Mautinoa Technologies with my CEO, Emerson Tan. Who are we? Mautinoa. We founded in September 2016, and the reason we were founded is a very long story, and it's a good one though. You can watch it there, there's a link, but you can also just Google open source and Ebola, because basically we were founded out after the 2014-2015 Ebola disaster relief efforts in Sierra Leone, where my CEO Emerson Tan did some amazing work building up a digital payments platform to pay out all the healthcare workers in the country. So we were founded and we decided to build a digital payment solution for tough environments. What that is, I will tell you a little later. What we're basically doing now is we're trying to change the definition of who is bankable in the world. Because right now there's 1.5 billion people who have no access to banking whatsoever, and another 1.5 billion who have very limited access to banks and the banking system. First of all, like to start this, I have a few questions. Who of you has failed even though they thought they did everything right at some point in their lives? So that's quite a few people. This talk is about being sort of successful while doing a lot of things in the wrong way, neglecting what is considered best practices. And then I want to get a quick understanding of my audience so I don't bore people with certain topics. How many of you are tech folks, like actual developers, these kind of things? Okay. How many of you do marketing, sales, outward bound? Also a few. How many of you are founders? Quite a lot. And how many of you are investors? Cool, let's talk later. So what we set out to do is we wanted to change the development aid world. We wanted to change the development aid world because the way development aid nowadays works is a lot of money that goes out into development cash and cash. We need a new way to help people with digital payment systems they can access. We want to bring, as I already said, financial services to 1.5 billion unbanked people. And we want to work with, sorry, this thing is bringing me out of, it's weird, I tap too much. And then, we wanted to work with NGOs, governments, private entities to set up these systems in various. And what we started with was a very, very clear product and a very, very defined market. If only. Our objective, the way we started, we wanted to build a digital banking system that has to work during network outages, because the reality in most development countries is that the infrastructure is bad. You have network outages when it rains, for example. You have power outages that get down the cell phone towers. You have difficult access to places, etc., etc. It must be cheap, which means it must be affordable for very poor people. It must be highly secure because we're actually handling cash. It must be easy to use because we're talking about people who are illiterate, who have no prior access to technology. And that makes it quite hard. So what it really makes it really hard is we're actually handling money. So yes, a very, very high level of security in erratic network conditions on old hardware with tons of malware around, because if you've got 4-year-old Android phones or even older, they're prone to be hacked or hackable. With illiterate users who are who haven't had the right access to technology, and in socially unstable environments. And what we built in the end is an Android app that functions as a terminal. We use smart cards for each user to access that Android app terminal. We have a Merkle tree-like data structure. If anybody understands blockchain technology a little, that's one part of the whole thing that people like to call blockchain. The other part is useless. And we cryptographically validate our transactions, and we therefore mitigate the risk towards smart cards. So the security risk is on the card. Cards are very much less hackable than smartphones are, and therefore much higher level of security. Quick overview of where we are now, before I get started in the whole how we built this thing. We're rolling out we have rolled out to several hundred users in the country of East Timor. We have several thousand coming up in the coming month, and there's more countries in the pipeline on the horizon, and we're also raising money. So there you go. Also, to give you a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about, here's a short overview over the country of East Timor, or Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste is there where the green bleep is. It's in the so-called Lesser Sunda Islands in the Indonesian archipelago. It's its own country since 2002. It gained independence after a 30-year-long struggle for independence after an attempted genocide by the Indonesians, and is the first new country of the 21st century. Population about 1.2 million, of them are 700,000 adults, which makes this a very easy test bed for us because it's a fairly defined and small market, but it has all the problems that you would expect from a developing country, being by most the poorest country in the world and the poorest country in Southeast Asia. 70% malnutrition rate, banking almost non-existable on the countryside in a way that, for example, a typical teacher would take a day off work per month, walk 3 hours to the bank, stand in line for 3 hours to pick up their cash, their salary, and walk 3 hours back. That's not good. So these are a couple of pictures. This is a typical market in the town of Aleu. So a lot of small subsistence farmers selling their produce. This is the typical, I'm sorry, this is a typical bank where people are standing in line. This is actually in the capital. It's much worse on the countryside, and then you have some ATMs that never work. And that's the main source of all the banking problems down there is a complete disaster in infrastructure. This was our office when we did some user testing on the countryside. This is people actually using our technology during a user testing session. And this is the statue of Mary on the highest peak of the mountain, so the country is also quite beautiful. What do you do when you start a company? That's what we asked ourselves when we founded our company. There's a lot of, big set of best practices, mantras, dogmas, what to do. You should should follow best practices as being lean and being agile. I think it might be the lag of this technology. I'm sorry, when I click it doesn't appear on the slides all the time. You should do design research, and you should follow certain development best practices. And that's what we all thought about when we founded, and really quickly noticed that this wasn't the case what we were doing. So for example, being lean, you start with creating a minimal viable product, and then you build, you measure, you learn, you get it out to the market as fast as possible. You A/B test your product to optimize on it, and you work quickly towards product market fit, which is usually a process where you get it out to the wild, test it with users, get customer feedback back, and then sort of work towards the right way of fitting the product to the market. And you probably also pivot, which we also did, but more on the sales part than on the product part. Being lean in practice, however, is in order to build a business, we needed to build the technology first. And the technology, as I already sort of explained, is not just a website or a web application. It's actual hard security-based technology on smart cards and Android apps and resilient backend. So we had to build quite a lot of technology to actually get out into the field. Early adoption only works in certain developed markets. There's no such thing as an early adopter in the countryside of East Timor, because they don't even grasp the concept of what they are or what they should, even though we're now getting it out to early adopters, but it's not such thing as finding tech enthusiasts and then getting momentum from them. Releasing prototypes also doesn't work if you really care about security, which we do, because it's either ready or it's not. There's no in between. And then our clients are not the users themselves, but technically often inadept NGOs, governments, institutions that move very slowly and don't fully grasp the impact of our technology. And part of the technology themselves is more comparable to space technology in a way that if you shoot up a rocket into space, it's out there and it's very hard to update, if at all. And if we, once we had our smart cards done, it's now also they're out in the field, and they're incredibly hard we can update them, but we rather wouldn't, so we had to do some very, very thorough testing. Being agile, you do agile software development, you choose a framework like Scrum, and you implement and measure what you are building and how your team works and your processes, and you release early and you release often, and have very defined roles of within the team of a product owner and a Scrum master and developers and everybody working together in a very defined process. Except that also only works in practice if, well, it's great if you have one team that does all this, but we had 6 teams, and every one of them was consisting of exactly one specialized person each, because we need to be small, and we, as a startup, you don't have the incredible funds of hiring 6 big teams, but we had one exact person, Dirk down there, who built our smart car technology, and we had one person who built our Android app, and we had specialized for parts of our system. So the normal Scrum process, as it works hand in hand, doesn't really work if most of the time these people don't really have to interact with one another because they do R&D most of the time. And therefore, if you use sprints and stories, that's quite a lot of overkill, and it didn't work in our case, so we had to improvise. It also means that Scrum is very rigorous with processes, and in a very small team, especially the way we are structured, it's a lot about team communication and getting these processes to sort of get the team to interface. But we're so small, and we had to choose different ways. Sprints can be very counterproductive, because if you're doing a long R&D sort of process, you might have individuals wander off for a month or 2 doing their own thing and then coming back with the result of an R&D process. And if you start and break that down into smaller things just to fit it, or sort of fit it into a Scrum process and into a sprint, that will quickly go sideways. So we decided to scrap that and build our own process that would fit what we needed to achieve. And velocity is not necessarily quality. If you do Scrum, you try to measure how fast and how good you're going by delivering business value, but business value, different ways of tracking business value, and it's not necessarily features in our case, but it's instead of features, it's software quality, it's resilience, it's security, and these kind of things are much harder to track than it's done, because it sort of works. That's why we also didn't use these kind of metrics. Remote work. So what we did is we decided to hire the best of the best, and the best of the best don't really happen to live all in the same place. So when we started, we had a guy in Kansas City. We had a guy in 2 guys in Berlin. We had our CTO, she lived in Brussels. We had one person in Los Angeles. We had one person in Las Vegas. I live in Hamburg. So we had to organize ourselves remotely. Our CEO formerly lives in London, but he's never there because he's traveling the world doing business. Remote work itself is fantastic. And it's all like there's this grand concept of, everybody sits by their favorite beach and hacks along on the laptop all day and stuff like that. But it's actually quite hard, and even if you don't do it right, but it can be super productive if you do. Because you don't have all these meetings, you don't have all these interfaces with people annoying and disturbing you. You can have it peace and quiet, but you need to organize yourself in the right way. In general, it's all about the discipline. It's as well getting up in the morning at the right time to get yourself to work, as is if you work in different time zones, getting yourself to stop. Because if you don't use the tools right, you're going to sit around waiting for another person on the other end of the world. It's 6 p.m. here. It's 9 a.m. in Los Angeles, you're waiting to sort of interface with the other person, or that person is waiting to interface with you. And then time zones start sucking really badly, because suddenly you're sitting at the desk at 10, 11 p.m. and trying to work out things, while rather you would like to have some sort of tools helping you and processes helping you to be able to end your work at a certain point in time, otherwise you're just going to burn out. We strongly believe in productivity not being a number of work hours, and we strongly believe in the right way of working, not being 10, 12 hours a day, but rather having a very defined time when you work, and then also getting off work, getting your breaks, and getting your sleep. And especially if your CEO is currently woken up at 1 a.m. in Melbourne, and you want to get up at 9 in the morning to talk to your Berlin folks, that's going to be quite hard unless you sort of manage to shut yourself down at a certain point. So you need to adapt your tools and apparently keep an eye on the communication to keep it in the right place. And communication is not bilateral, and it's not like live. It shouldn't be too much live, but it needs to be, a lot of discipline in writing things down, posting them in the right channels for everybody to read later. Another problem that arose at some point is you have one office, and we had that in Berlin. We had 3 people in Berlin in one office. And we had a few satellites around, so the company evolved 3 people in Berlin, 2 in the US, me in Hamburg, and you start getting implicit and hierarchical knowledge based on the fact that 3 people are sitting in the same room together and others are not. Others, wake up later, the communication doesn't happen on Slack, but at the coffee machine, and suddenly you're not quite sure anymore whether you told everybody or you just had this conversation over the dinner table or lunch table. So you really need to make sure that everybody is part of the bigger conversation. One thing we did there was to make sure that every time a conversation happened and it was about work, someone had to have afterwards to sit down with everybody. So we discussed this feature, we discussed this part. We think any other thought, then the conversation next day. We had regular interfacing calls. Our stand-ups are not in the morning, but at 6 p.m. because that's when Los Angeles wakes up. And that was also then the time after the stand-up, which might, at some point, it's not only a stand-up like everybody quickly reporting what they're doing, but then following into a larger discussion. Then by 7 p.m. the Germans or the people in Germany would shut let the people in go on with their work, and if someone actually had to do longer work with the people in America, take the time off during the day, maybe go do whatever in the park, meet a friend for a coffee or something, and not also work in the afternoon. Next topic. I'm rushing sort of through this because there's a lot of broad topics and I can't go in depth with every individual one, but I'm open to any kind of afterwards. So this is the way I'm structuring this a little. The next topic is neurodiversity, because it's a topic that's really dear to my heart. Neurodiversity defines people with conditions being part of the overall neurological spectrum of the human biome. So rather than calling things like autism, ADHD, depression, anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, etc., outliers, we consider this as an integral part of human life. And this is especially important because if you have ever worked with what people call nerds and noticed that nerds might be odd, there's a high chance of your co-workers having ADHD, being autistic, being somewhere on the autistic spectrum, or struggling with depression, because depression is especially prevalent within highly intelligent people. And we started to accompany this from the get-go. So we have a very open culture of what I call a culture of vulnerability in our company, where it is perfectly okay to talk about your human condition, where it is perfectly okay to say, I have a bad brain day today, I can't work, but it's going to be fine tomorrow. Or where it's perfectly okay in a way, and after 3 he said, by the way, I'm currently depressed, what can I do? We figured out to help him. And that way we got him back on track and productive in a way that he was happy again quite fast, because we actually care about our people. So there's a lot of discussion around this topic in our company. It's very open. There's no shame in it. I have ADHD myself, and I'm very vocal about it, and I'm fine with it. So this is another topic that that definitely doesn't meet the standard 101 of management, how to deal with people, sort of textbook thing. I've also, So far, that's about our company. Now we go a little outside, and we wanted to move fast, the government. So, going to market fast is really great, but it doesn't work if you're talking to ethically ambiguous ministries, which I'm not saying corruption, but So we had this one situation in a country in Southeast Asia. We were talking to the Vice Minister of Finance. The Minister of Finance was a fantastic guy, old World Bank guy, more or less incorruptible, very high moral principles, and it went on for about 8 months. We were talking about implementing our system in their social security system. They all loved it. The UN was on board. They were helping us facilitating the whole thing. The Vice Minister of Finance loved it. He was on board. He even got it to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister says, yeah, that's great. Whatever the Vice Minister of Finance says, we trust this guy. And about 3 weeks later, the guy was gone. He had fled the country because his moral incorruptibility wasn't meeting the other moral standards of the government. And he was ousted and was fearing for his life, so he rather left the country. I'm not naming the country, but it's big. So the other thing is there that you might just encounter technically illiterate NGOs, and that means that you go into a meeting with them and they're all very interested in your product and they want to roll it out in refugee camps and large-scale refugee camps throughout Africa or the Middle East, talking about, for example, the big refugee camps in the Syrian-Turkish border. And then you find out that the way they handle things in their data collection would mean that you would actually, in order to implement the system, would actually you have to do several months or even years' work of data consolidation and all these sort of basic fundamental things we would need to actually be able to register people, roll out our system, pay people in cash, wouldn't work because these organizations fundamentally have different incentives of working. They want to help people. Their incentive is not to moving fast and getting their IT straight. So that was another boundary we sort of met. And then you meet banks who move about as fast as a glacier because they're really old business and they love your product, but setting up a next meeting takes 3 months and so on and so on. And this is something that when it comes all together, we encountered these problems also in East Timor, where we set up our system together with an NGO called World Vision. They're fantastic people. They very much understood what we're doing. The country manager is great, and he's actually fast enough to move things, but East Timor on the other side has a political system that is in a deadlock. 2 political parties can't agree on anything, and the central bank was putting out fires most of the time, every time we could try to get a meeting, so it took us about 4 months to actually get into the same room with them, even though we were channeling it through advisors via the Asia Development Bank, World Bank, and so on, but they were just not available at all because they were dealing with other stuff. Right now, however, we are on the brink of getting a banking license in East Timor, which is great. And so we can actually operate as a full bank down there. But it shows that the traditional environments in which you make business, especially in a very Western developed country like Germany or generally in Western capitalism, don't work that well in other parts of the world, and you really have to adapt to that, and you have to set yourself up for failure, and you have to follow multiple opportunities, and you really can't say, like in a traditional sales pipeline, some of you might know this, you would have something like, we're at this stage, and this is what we expect, and this is the revenue we expect, and we have such and such high percentage of that deal, and you can sort of calculate it and make a sales forecast, and that's completely impossible here. As I said, 8 months project that was going really well up to the Prime Minister stopped dead when this guy suddenly vanished. So that was setting up the business side. Now, we got our project. We had built our technology to a certain point that it was sort of working. Still a couple of things to figure out, but the functional prototype was there. We were in the stage where we were polishing it and making it even more secure and sort of doing quality assurance. So I went down to East Timor to do some user research. Usually, design research or user research in theory works in a way that you find an office, for example up here. You invite your target audience, for example males 25 to 35, certain income range. You do interviews or user testing, you get these people in and you ask them questions about their spending habits, or you do user testing, show them your app and maybe film what they're doing and you observe the way they use it and try to use this to further your design and do all these kind of things. And then you take it from there and build something great or even greater. Design research and theory and practice works like this. Keep an eye on the door. So we went out, or I went out together with our partners from World Vision to East Timor, to the countryside, to Aleo, which is in the rainy season 3.5 hours drive through terrible roads, through rivers with a 4-wheel drive. We were there, and we had some fundamental problems. So if you build the technology and you don't really know which country you're building it for, what target audience are you talking about and which office? We had this office I showed you before, and that was from the inside. The target audience in our case is 100% of the population, but the country was unclear until I actually went to East Timor. So it might as well have been Syrian refugees in southern Turkey, or refugees fleeing from Boko Haram in northern Nigeria, or people in the Central African Republic. We were culturally completely different, and there's no way of, the only thing they have in common is that they're considered poor by our standards, and they might be illiterate, and they might be malnourished, but even that is very different. So the target audience is very unclear, but it's 100% of the population. And the market research that we did then turned out to be a real cultural literacy issue, which means everybody of you in this room very much understands what an interview is, what honest answers and honest questions mean, how you act in such an interview situation. So if I ask you an open question, you will give me a long answer. If I ask you, what are you spending, what do you spend money on, you will think about it for a bit and then just sort of, try and break it down. What happened there was the opposite. People didn't know what we were doing. They were afraid. Obviously, I had come 12,500 kilometers all the way to see them. I had a translator, like 3 people in the room. And it turned out to be very, very difficult in a way that I heard things like, yes, thank you for coming all this long way to bring us your great technology, which is super nice, but not helpful at all. And getting one-sentence answers, pulling things out of people's mouths all the time because we couldn't, because it was just not possible to get the right answers we needed. And friendliness is an issue if people perceive you as we have to be friendly, even if you encourage them to be as open as possible. And you can't just use a design research firm from where you're going to because they don't exist. Like there's 0 capable designers in East Timor. The country has a terrible education system. All the good people leave the country. If they study abroad, they don't come back. So there's no such thing as a design research firm somewhere. You can just tap and ask them to do the job. So you're always going to be there with the translator. Things get lost in translation. I had the situation where I would ask a question and expect an answer, and I asked a short question and I got a long answer, and the translator would pose my question in like 6 sentences and give me a 1-sentence answer, because then you also have the issue of the translator actually not really understanding what you're attempting to do, because obviously they don't have design research training either. So getting honest answers is a cultural privilege I might have with people like you in this room, but which I don't have so much in... Is the battery down? Technology, yay. It might be that the battery is dead, I'm sorry. It's blinked over. Something crashed, I'm sorry.
Warte.
So, that was about the shortest thing I could do about design research. A lot more stories to tell there, but then again we have time for questions and answers later. Technology. Create prototypes. We built a quick prototype. You release early. You iterate, you refactor, and you fix bugs and improve things. That's how it usually should go. What we did is we had to throw the first one away, and we did that by principle. So this is more for the tech folks amongst you. We believe that iteration can kill, or at least work against reflection, in a way that if you have the opportunity to iterate on your product all the time, you will never sit down and look at the big picture. You will never fundamentally ask yourself, is our tech stack the right thing? Is security implemented in the right way? But rather iterate and iterate and iterate yourself to death until you at some point end up with a huge amount of tech debt, even though you refactored individual things, and then you will start over at a very much later point. Security is often not taken into account enough, and we had to build our system secure from the get-go. So we always had this sort of what about mindset all the time, and that needs to be reflected in the daily developmental practices, and not only in a way that you use secure languages and things like that, but more on a fundamental architectural level. And then, yeah, you learn, if you throw the first one away, you learn how, if your tech stack is right, you just build it with a prototypical thing, a language like we built our first blockchain thing based on Git, and then we immediately knew that was just for prototype reasons, and then we throw it away. So we did that. And then we simulated certain use cases in order to make sure that once we got into the wild, once we knew we could release the software, we would actually know what certain scenarios would look like, even though we couldn't really beta test them out there. So knowing what your tech stack is right has a certain value to it. And the question there is, how many companies notice very late and under heavy load that they're just using the wrong tech stack? And the answer is quite a lot. And there's so many people who've told me, yeah, I've had all these design and architecture reviews which boiled down to this won't work in the real world, we're sort of screwed, and then you'll be dead and you'll be blissfully unaware in your cubicle and don't know what really killed you. So we learned to do that better by deliberately taking things, building them, throwing them away even before release, and we had this true value in learning fast what we are fundamentally doing. So to end this, before I'm going to sort of summarize it, there's a way of measuring customer demand, and that is by stories. And usually in the normal tech world, you measure customer demand by all sorts of key performance indicators and maybe some user feedback. We had, after one demo, we had, and a training session, a group of elderly village people, leaders, trekked overnight over mountains in the freezing fog, arrived at our office at 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. in the morning and asked our team when their villages would get the platform. So that's customer demand. And we're getting this over and over again. Our technology is actually working down there. We are getting a lot of real-world examples of people immediately noticing what the impact would be. One mother told us that it was fantastic because she now has the smart card. She doesn't have change in her pockets anymore, and that means that she doesn't have to succumb to so many impulse purchases, buying sweets and other things that are not good for their child, but rather being able to deliberately save money, deliberately buy high-value food. The other thing is that people suddenly sort of see an option of saving money. Before it was stashed on the pillow, and the next time a relative came and asked them if they could help fund the next wedding or funeral, which happens a lot and all the time down there, they wouldn't have to go under the pillow to pick the money out, but rather say I have no money on my card, and that's a real sort of issue. So we learn by talking, by investigating, by me spending almost a month in East Timor, which is not nearly enough, but about the right amount of money we could afford budget-wise, that our product would perform, that it would work, and the first results are in, and they're showing it does. So to recap all of this and to put it in a sort of bigger perspective, what can you learn from this? There's a lot of ways to improvise the way you build your company, but you have to be deliberate about it. Improvisation doesn't just mean, we do it sort of play-by-ear thing, but actually sitting down, being deliberate, thinking about what you want to do with your processes, with your whole way of developing things, and then go from there. So improvisation means that it's not that one size fits all at all, but there's many sizes and they fit many companies, and there's very many different ways of methodologies of doing things. By the book, things by the book will often fail, even though the books tell you differently. Even if this failure is dressed like success at first. Even if you think, wow, this is all moving so fast, this is also fantastic, and then you notice it falls on your foot later. You need to reflect, you try new things, question the dogma of what is out there, because a lot of, especially in the startup world, there's so much advice that you should do it exactly this way and then you will be the next Facebook, and that, honestly, it's wrong. And then make sure that your structure supports the team and not the other way around. Make sure that your people can work as productively and individually productively as possible. Cut down on your open space offices. Allow for people to work freely wherever they need to. Cut down on meetings. Make sure that people get into deep work, 3-4 hours uninterrupted work. That's where things happen. That's where good quality can exist. And then, about the being deliberate part, I want to add that don't confuse improvisation with chaos. Improvisation is in the same way that a good jazz artist will know exactly what notes to play, but they're improvising on it. Improvisation, and it's not just the chaotic music that a person who's never played the instrument would play. In the same way, you need to know your skill set and you need to know what you're actually doing to improvise properly. You need to spend time thinking about these processes, even if the current chaos doesn't hurt anyone. Ask yourself, what will this still work 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road? Preempt whatever could come up with what you're doing, and ask yourself, are we still improvising the right way? Plan ahead, but also keep in mind that in the long run we will all be dead, which just means don't make yourself too much of an effort to plan for the next 3 years. And with that, I'm done, and it's been quite of a fast ride, and I hope you all have some questions for me. So thank you for listening. I assume there's another mic somewhere that people can read. There's someone coming up there.
Thank you very much for this. Doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. We need the sound for the stream, so.
Okay, thank you very much for this very interesting talk and your insights. I've got a question about the hands-on the tools you use for having a good workflow with your team. So not only for making the time shifts working, also for the communication around the organization around.
So we use a lot of Slack. We have very many different channels for the Slack that are for different things. For example, we have a channel dedicated to availability, where everybody would write when they're going for lunch, when they're getting off work, when they're starting work, these kind of things. Hey, I have a meeting today, or I have to go to somewhere, or these kind of things. What we do in our channels is make sure that we write down ideas. We tried some other tools which were nice, but sort of no one adopted them. That's also an effort we need to make in the future. We need to, we use phone calls, Slack calls for our daily stand-ups. We used a little Jira, but it sort of wasn't adopted right. Well, right now we use issues within GitLab. We use a wiki. Good point. Thank you. Yeah, that's sort of most of what it is right now. But we played around with a lot of tools. We used Trello in the beginning. Then we went to Jira. We switched around with Jira quite a lot. Now we have GitLab issues. We tried different ways of working with the wiki. The tools themselves, like the fundamental tools, is just writing things down in certain structured ways, but the way you use them is the right question. And that, depends on the company.
Thank you.
Any other question?
Can you talk about the tech stack? Like, what's
Yes.
the smart card?
The smart card is based on Java card. The whole server thing, environment, DevOps thing is a lot of things. This is the part I put my least sort of knowledge into and just trust people. But we, for example, use Amazon Key Management Storage for our KMS for storing the keys. Our backend is based on Git on Go, and we're currently working on a administration front end based on Odoo, which used to be OpenERP, which is Python based, but taps into the same database. So we had to adjust that a little. The Android part is Kotlin, so it's native Android with Kotlin, and then there's a lot of side things. So that's the main sort of things.
So do you have to be connected to internet to make a payment? Or
No.
So how does that work?
So every card downloads currently 10 limited use keys that work once. And a transaction is based on the recipient's card tapping to the phone, identifying themselves as the recipient. The phone then generates a transaction with the nonce that is verifiable from the recipient. The sending card is then tapped to the phone and signs the transaction, and then the recipient card gets this transaction and verifies the signature. And then there's a lot of things around it that make it more secure and make it prevent double spending and stuff like that.
Hi. Are there any costs that user needs to pay for it, or?
The fee structure, so yeah, yes and no. The way we model our fee structure is that transactions between individuals under a certain amount of money are free. Transactions, we gain money from money entering and exiting the system. So if you have an institution, for example, the government that wants to pay out pensions or teacher salaries or things, it's going to cost you, but it's going to be still way cheaper than the current banking system. If you are in a big supermarket that wants to inject money into the system because you want to pay farmers, then that's going to cost you a little less percentage-wise. And the other way around, if you want money to exit the system and to pay out to your, for example, bank account because you're a supermarket and $1,000, you will also pay, which also is sort of a, it's sort of, the idea behind this is that we have one of the problems in East Timor is capital flight, so the rich people take as much money as they can and get it offshore, and in this way we tax that, so it's sort of a Tobin tax on that. So the whole fee structure is built in a way that we can accommodate for the economy and nurture the economy by not taxing the poorest, and still make this whole thing work. And then, obviously, how do we generate income? Oh, this is the first tier of income. Then the second one becomes apparent if you then look at how the companies work that do microfinancing, microloans. They have a hard time in assessing the right risk towards people, and we will then at some point have all the data to make it easier for microloans and invest in their own business, for example. So these are like long-term sort of things we can add on top of that. But the main fee structure is built in a way that we can accommodate for people who have like $50 to $70 income a month. Please.
You've got a very high exclamation input for the people, it sounds to me, because they don't know about it.
Yes.
So
we spent. So can continue.
how did you deal with that? You went there with a good solution, but of course people didn't know about it.
Yeah.
And I don't have fear to use it.
Yes.
Depending on the culture.
No, there's a lot of stories to tell about that. I went down to East Timor twice. Once was to sort of preliminary understand how the economy works on an individual basis, how people spend money, what kind of things they how their individual usage of this would be. And the second time we had our design sort of ready and devised a training scheme and user tested this training scheme. So we trained people, sat people in a room, explained to them how this would work, and then have them train it and observe them with using it. And it turns out that the lowest rate of understanding the system came from young men, and the highest rate came from old women, because young men don't tend to read the instructions. So so we had this. So we then understood, for example, that we now need voiceover for people who are illiterate. Illiteracy doesn't start when you don't know the alphabet. Illiteracy is more of a problem mostly with people understanding the alphabet but rarely using it. So they would take quite a bit of time to deciphering the words and to understanding the context. So voiceover, there's, for example, something that we're adding now. The general sort of, working with animations, these kind of things that came later, there's a lot of, it's made very easy, and people, after using it for 2 or 3 times, people understand it. So what we also have is a training mode where you can just play around without fear of breaking anything. And then there's a lot of training going on in the communities, but it's yes, that's going to be the scaling part is going to be the next. But if you get the way the countryside works, it's very, very tightly knit communities. And if you get 2 or 3 of each village elders, people who are better educated than the rest, into a room, and you have a room with 20 people, then you can serve 10 villages at a time, and then they will be able to explain it in their own words to people in a very better way than we do, because they know their people as well. So that's how we're attempting to spread it, and that's how we're scaling it up now.
Any more questions?
Hey Julian, my name is Valentin. Thank you for the talk.
Thank you.
I have a question. Do you have a QA engineer in your company?
We did.
Right.
So no, we had a QA engineer. We hired that engineer. So this is part to the whole sales cycle thing I explained. We were very much preparing to sort of get a launch, and then we found out that it would take longer to sell the whole thing. So we unfortunately had to let this person go. Right now we don't, because we are a little short on funding, well, we were a little short on funding, but we have a thorough QA process that involves a lot of automated testing, and we developed our testing protocols ourselves to serve that need. There will, at some point in time, be a QA engineer role if you're interested in that, but it's not right now. Yes.
Thank you. 2 questions. First of all, as a soon-to-be regulated financial institution in East Timor, can you elaborate a bit on compliance and how you manage all that?
Yeah.
And also, what about competition in the widest sense? I know that there are similar companies around that focusing on developing markets.
Yes.
MyBox, for example. So, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the first answer is hilarious. We went up to the central bank in East Timor and said, hey, we have this new digital payment system. What are your regulations for digital money storage and these kind of things? And they were like, do you want to write them? And we're like, that's a bad idea. You should never regulate your own stuff. So we got in some advices from the Asia Development Bank, and we're working on all of this compliance. Right now, compliance mostly means know your customer, which means we register every user with a name. Everybody in East Timor luckily has some sort of ID, either voter registration ID or driver's license or these kind of things. And then, name and birth date and things like that. So we have know your customer. That's currently the only regulation. And then we at some point probably have to adhere to other kind of general sort of compliance, the way data is stored and so on and so forth, which we're doing right already. It's more of a certification question then, or more of writing it all down and documenting it properly. The other question was competition. To my knowledge, there's no other system, and to many other people's knowledge, there's no other system that can do offline transactions that work offline. There's a lot of, especially in East Africa, there's a lot of so-called mobile money. Mobile money works based on SMS. The problem is that if the phone network goes down, you can't pay. We are especially building for disaster, like our highest use case is a disaster area struck by flooding, struck by earthquake, where we would then, as soon as we know what's happening, possibly draw a geofence around our system, around the area, inject money immediately so that people could use it before the power goes down, and work with it in a situation where you're having power up and down all the time. So that's the first key point of what we're building is the availability of networks. Then the other part is that a lot of systems are sort of building on the fact that people have smartphones. Well, a lot of them don't. And then the other problem with mobile money is that you need to have the telecoms on board, and in a lot of countries the telecoms hate each other. So getting interoperability done, for example in Kenya this only worked because the 2 largest mobile payment solutions, M-Pesa and the other one I forgot the name right now, were regulated by the government at some point to work together with each other. At that point, before that it was 2 distinct systems. And if you go into areas where you need to get the telecoms on board in the first place, it's going to be a hell of a ride and probably not going to work out. So we're completely independent of telecoms, and that's another thing. And then obviously the smartphone necessity, etc., etc., is another one.
Okay, one last.
Come on, If there's more questions, we take more questions. 2 more. See?
Sorry, I actually have 2 more questions. First, you actually mentioned that most of the people have outdated phones, right? And I can imagine like
Yeah.
worse idea than like running a bank on outdated phone that will never get updated from the manufacturer.
Yeah, that's going to be the case. So we run on phones, smartphones that use NFC and Android 4.1. That's what we built for. We built for shitty hardware, and the reason that works is because we're using the phone only as a transport layer and only to transmit already encrypted data between smart cards and the server.
Okay. Second question is, you actually mentioned that you're about 6 engineers. You have an operational team.
Yeah.
And how do you deal like with the language issues? I assume that people who are troubleshooting the people's problems are not living there, right?
Yeah, that's actually what we're preparing for next is the rollout to many thousand people who don't speak our language, and probably even like the concept of a bug report is so alien to them that you might as well talk about, I don't know, Mars. So yes, that's going to be a problem. We're working on that. I don't have a definitive solution yet. It's going to be a lot of our partners working together with the communities in regular questions and answers. It's going to be a lot of instrumentation where we look at, for example, certain error messages and the frequency they pop up, and use this kind of data to understand if people are using the system wrongly. And then it's going to be, hopefully, people, going down there regularly looking at stuff. But there's not going to be a traditional sort of, hey, I found this bug. If you do these 5 weird things, then suddenly X. That's just going to be the case. But we need to prepare for that, and that's why we're building our software as tight as possible.
Just to add on to that, how much time did it take for you to actually build the real product?
A little more than 2 years.
And the MVP?
And so that's we didn't build a classical MVP. The first prototype we built that was not the way we did it in the end, and relied on all the old tech. Took about 6 to 8 months, and then 10 months maybe, and then the rest of the time was rebuilding the whole thing in a secure way.
Maybe last question.
Well, I'm open for questions. Like, you guys tell me if you can bear it.
I'm the boss, okay? I'm the boss.
Anyhow, thanks for the many insights on how to fail and still succeed. I got one question. Like, you're doing something to the local economy and to the local banks, actually, and I'm interested in how the banks respond to your actions. Like, what do they do? Because they must see that things going to change.
Well, so the banks. So the largest commercial banks in East Timor only operate in the capital of Dili, which is 280,000 people. So the 3/4 of the country don't even have the largest commercial banks. One of the larger commercial banks was the Australian New Zealand Bank, which recently withdrew. So now you can't pay with MasterCard in the whole country anymore, or get money with it. Another one is a bank I'm blanking on, but it's an Indonesian bank. The only bank people on the countryside are really using is the Banco Nacional Comercial de Timor-Leste, BNCTL, and that's the one where they're queuing up for ages. So they don't really make a profit out of, they're mainly state sort of subsidized, and they don't entirely care because they don't really make a profit. Also, the massive operating fees, so as far as I'm concerned, they either cooperate with us or they go under and no one will cry a tear, except for maybe 10, 15, I don't know, 20 employees who work there. But it's mainly a very, very dire situation with banking down there. Banking fees, like for a transaction, you pay over $5 to perform a single bank transfer. ATMs are down all the time. And one last story I want to share is, for example, you have in East Timor there's a thing called Posa de Mai, which is every mother gets $5 per child per month for better nutrition because malnutrition rate is high. And because of the way the banks are set up or not set up, this is only paid out every 6 months. So now you're a mother of 2 child who gets $60 after 6 months. First of all, you spend between $10 and $15 to get to this money. And then you have these, say, $45, $50, and you're not going to spend them on eggs or beans because now you've got such a lump sum of money, you might as well spend them on your housing infrastructure or a new motor for the motorbike or something like that. So what we can change eventually is getting the Ministry of Social Solidarity on board and then paying out, say, $1.50 per week to everybody who then, if the mother gets $1.50, she will suddenly start buying, say, eggs for their children again, because then it's not that lump sum, and the whole concept of saving is saving up that money is not that attractive compared to actually spending it immediately. So there's hopefully going to be a lot of change with our system, and it's already starting because that's also the feedback we get from people.
Shared and especially making it so real. My question, the first question, there's just very two questions. My first question is, what do you assume is the transaction size going to be on average?
Less than $5, depending. So an individual transaction will be people buying produce on the market. And then there's obviously other transactions such as large supermarkets from the capital buying wholesale for $1,000 or more for a whole village that is then distributed amongst the farmers in the village. So that's also going to be the case. But the usual transaction is just going to be individual purchases for daily food.
Yeah, and the reason I also thought it would be extremely useful in terms of what we see our regular banks to be, right? And the reason I asked the question was, how do you envision mobile banking in especially such areas? I come from Southeast Asia, so I know the reality of...
Where are you from, if I may ask?
India.
India. Okay.
So for example, in India, we have these self-help groups, women of 10 to 13, who would, one person would have the responsibility for all the banking that happens between that group.
Yeah.
So how do you then envision mobile banking to be, so does it have to be functioning like Commerce Bank or Deutsche Bank here, or it can also have other features like sharing users, user ability, etc.
That's totally possible. So what we have in East Timor is so-called loan and savings groups, which is probably similar to what you just described. Basically, especially women in the communities, opening up their sort of local bank where every family would put in $5 a month, and if your roof is broken, you can, or you have a bad crop this year, a bad yield, you can get money from that. And there's all sorts of options of making, putting on, installing savings accounts, for example, and we will just at some point we will just listen to what the people need. Right now, it's just the simple way of transacting money that they actually need and they're going to use. And then at some point we will gain additional insights. And then as soon as we're spreading out, so I already said we're looking at other countries. We currently got preliminary interest, nothing close to a deal from places like Papua New Guinea, from Senegal, from Sierra Leone, Central African Republic, Northern Nigeria. All these places in the world are very, very culturally different from each other and all have their individual different set of problems. And hopefully, as soon as these are rolled out and work and we actually get revenue enough to sort of set up individual projects there, we can then accommodate for additional features that make sense in the individual country.
Thank you so much, Julian. That was
Thank
very,
you.
very, very special. Maybe another one.
Woo! Thank you very much.
So yeah, you can stay around, grab a beer outside. You can have one-on-ones with Julian. I think we'll be here for another.
I have business cards.
Yes, business cards. They're searching for investments. And yeah, GTEC is doing these kinds of events all the time. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever. Subscribe to our newsletter, and then you don't miss out anything. We're also planning great summer parties outside, so the summer is finally here. Looking forward to see you all again. Thank you and have a nice evening.
Thank you.